Today I'm going to share with you my favorite subject in the whole world. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Why it's my favorite subject in the whole world? Because when I learned about peace, I think I've learned the greatest lesson in my life. And so I'd like to share it with you. In the early days of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, when they were really, really bad, and I was feeling down and frustrated and wanting to move away, just run away to get away from the war and the peace, the war and the Troubles, and thinking that this was no place to bring up my children. Well, one day I was in my son's bedroom, who was a teenager at that time, and you know what teenagers' bedrooms look like. It was an absolute a mess. And I was thinking about some terrible bombing that had happened just the day before, and many people that were killed, and feeling like everybody else in our province very sad. Now, my son, I told you, was a member of the Peace People. And he was a great follower of Gandhi. And one time when I was in America, I bought him a calendar from the Gandhi movie. And he had it on the wall. And I noticed that it said, for that day, there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Now, I'd been listening to all this talk from our politicians that we have to get round the table, we have to negotiate, one side has to give something and the other side has to give something in order for us to get peace. That we had to do certain things to get peace, for peace to come. And so I thought that this was a bit of a contradiction. And I remember arguing with it and saying, no, there has to be a way to peace. Peace is the way, but I kept thinking about it for days, and the more I thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. And at that time, my eldest daughter was about 15, and she had just discovered boys. And you know what that's like. Her room was always a mess, and she was up there with her friends playing tapes or going to her friend's house, but not doing any homework or tidying her room or doing anything that she should have been doing. Now, I tried to bring peace to this situation. So I tried to negotiate with her, but it didn't work. And one morning, I was calling them all for school. I had 5 children. I was calling them all to get up for school. And I kept calling her name. She was the last one downstairs. And I shouted, "Are you up?" And she kept saying, "Yes, I am up." But I couldn't hear a sound from upstairs in the bathroom or anything. So I ran upstairs 3 flights of stairs to the attic room where she was. I was quite out of breath. And when I got in, she had earphones on. And she was in the bed and she had a pillow over her head. And she was dancing in the bed to this music. And I screamed at the top of my voice, "Listen, my girl, you're late for school and you get out of that bed." Well, she jumped so hard that she hit her head on the sloping roof. And she ran right down into the bathroom with me banging on the door and saying, "Just wait until you come home today and I'm going to have a good talk with you," and so forth. Now, I was trying to pray about peace in our community. But here I was negotiating a little war inside the house. And when I come down, all the rest of the kids were getting on their coats and their school bags and they were trying to get out of my way. And even the dog, who paid no attention to me, got under the chair. And she came downstairs without any breakfast, ran out to school in tears. And I sat down and said, now I made a mess of that. Here I am trying to pray about peace in our province, and I'm negotiating this little war. Now, this is not the way to pray about it. So I said, "Father, you're going to have to show me. how to work this out. Because I was so angry, and I was saying, I will have peace in my house. But there wasn't much peace at all. Well, after they went out and I sat quietly down and I began to read from the Bible, and then I suddenly remembered the words of an old Negro spiritual song, which maybe you know. And it says, it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Not my brother, not my sister. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. So I saw that it was really me who was in need of prayer, because I was believing that my daughter was a rebellious teenager who would not be told, that she was disobedient, she was unwilling, she was untidy, she was all sorts of things. So I had to see, no, this is God's beloved child, and she's made in His image and likeness. And God saw all that He had made, and behold, it was very good. So He made her good. And then the wee voice would say, but she's so unwilling to even listen. Now, I knew that unwilling is the opposite of willing. So I looked up the word willing in the dictionary. And it was interesting. It says, not slow, lazy, or reluctant, quick to act, prompt to do, ready to respond. I began to see, well, that's how God sees His child. That's how His child is in truth. And that's how she is. Now, when I began to think that way, I began to feel a great sense of peace. And when she came home in the afternoon, she put her arms round me and said, Mommy, I'm sorry. She said, I was wrong, and I must have been awful to live with. She went straight upstairs, she cleaned her room, she got into her homework, and very soon after that, she had an opportunity to go to a lovely school in England for Christian Scientists. And so I learned from that we have to be at peace first, that what it said on that Gandhi calendar was an absolute truth. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way. But I thought we'd get peace through negotiating and arguing and pointing out to her how wrong she was. But I had to be at peace, and then I could listen to what God was telling me about His precious child. Now, Jesus Christ has been called the Prince of Peace. And I love that title for Him, because He is the Son of the King. And the King, as we know, is God. And our God is a God of peace. Nothing on this earth can disturb God. Isn't that a wonderful thought? To know that nothing on this earth could disturb God. And if we become more God-like, we become more like Him, we become more undisturbable. When you're disturbed, or when you're not disturbed and you're at peace, you're able to see things much, much more clearly. So it's Christmas time, we're celebrating what He brought. He brought peace on earth. That was the gift that He brought. And that's the gift that He left us. When the Master knew that His time was come and He was leaving this earth, and He had no earthly possessions, He had no money, He had no home, He had no car, He had never written a book. But what did He leave to His disciples in the world? Peace. He said, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. He must have realized that peace was His most valuable possession. And that's what He wanted to leave. He was saying, if you learn that, you've learned everything. And I was beginning to learn it in a funny sort of way. But you know, it took me years. It took me years to learn about peace. I didn't learn it in that one lesson with my daughter. It was very gradually and little by little, because we're so used to being disturbed and agitated. And we live in a stress-filled world. Everybody's suffering from stress. So it's difficult to change our thinking right around and say, no, I'm not going to be disturbed. I'm going to be at peace. And if you be at peace, peace will become the way to solving your problem and to healing. So don't try to heal a physical condition, or don't try to heal a financial problem or any other kind of relationship problem. First of all, say to yourself, I'm going to be at peace, because it's not the problem, but that I've let it disturb me. It's not what's going on in our bodies or what's going on in our homes or in our lives, but that we have let it disturb us. That's the real problem that is behind it. So if our God is a peaceful God, and we're made in His image and likeness, then we must be peaceful too. It's our nature to be peaceful. So when we're not at peace, we can't bear it, because we really ought to be always at peace. When my children were young, I took in dressmaking at one period. I never wanted to go out to work and leave them. And one time I had to finish a big order for a certain date, and I was rushing to get through it. The woman needed the garments and I needed the money at the same time. And the night before, I was staying up late to finish them off, and my sewing machine broke down. Well, I tried everything to fix it. I took it all apart, and I got out the manual, and according to the manual, I put it all back together again. But it still didn't work. And my neighbour had a husband who fixed her sewing machine, and she told me if I ever needed him to look at it, he would. So I called in my neighbour's husband, and he worked at it and worked at it. And he said, typical woman, he said, you probably took it together and you took it apart and you couldn't put it together again. He said, that's typical of women. He said, so I'll put it all together correctly and according to the manual. And I'm very pleased to tell you that when he did that, it didn't work. I was really pleased about that. So the next day I had to call in an engineer to look at the machine. He took one look at it and he began to laugh. And I said, what's so funny? He said, your machine only needs oil. It only needed oil. And there I'd gone through all this trouble, taking it all apart, putting it all together again. And I think that oil is a mixture of peace and joy. We need peace, but we need joy, because sometimes we take ourselves far too seriously. I'm sure you've noticed that you do that in your life, and I know that so do I. There's a verse in the Bible I like. It says, a merry heart doeth good like medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. Though we don't want to suffer from dried old bones, we have to make sure that our spirit can't be broken and our joy cannot be taken from us. I used to have a woman call me several times a day. She had a physical problem, and I knew that she was in a lot of pain, but she was a person who was really difficult to help, because not only did she tell me all her symptoms over and over again, but she told me all the problems in her family and of the woman next door and the woman 3 doors up from that, and she'd be on the phone for about an hour and 15 minutes. And I used to dread her coming on the phone. Well, one night my telephone was ringing just one after the other all night, and I was really busy. It was almost midnight, and I was looking forward very much to going to bed, and the telephone rang. And I thought, I know who that is. At first, I wasn't going to answer her. And then I thought, if I don't, she'll keep on ringing. So I answered her, and she said, "Oh, Myrtle, I've been trying to get through to you all night, and your telephone has been so busy." Now, her problem was an obstruction in her bowel. And she said, "So when I couldn't get through to you, I went in the bath and I put lots of lovely suds in the bath, and I had a bubble bath, and I lay there and I soaked." And she said, "While I was in the bath, I was lying there thinking, I wonder what God's doing right now." She said, "Myrtle, do you know what God would be doing right now?" Oh, what a question for midnight, and I was tired. So I said to her, "Well, I'll tell you something I know he's not doing." And she said, "Well, what's that?" And I said, "Well, he wasn't soaking his bum in the bath." And suddenly I began to laugh, because I could picture a big God with a big grey beard sitting in a big square bath up in heaven and pulling out his hair and saying, "What a day I've had with this world, with these nutcases that are in this world." And I couldn't stop laughing. And I laughed and laughed and laughed. And she said, "What's so funny?" So I told her that I visualized this picture, and she began to laugh. And you know, after I hung up, I got into bed, and my bed was shaking. I was laughing so much. She was the first person on the phone the next morning. And she said, "Myrtle, when I got into bed, I laughed for another hour at just imagining God in the bath and pulling out his hair." And she said, when I got up this morning, everything passed away very effortlessly and naturally. She got her healing. You see, she'd oiled the works. And sometimes that's what we need to do. We need to oil the works with a little joy as well as the peace. They go together very well. And one time I was lecturing in Copenhagen, and I was actually giving this lecture, "There is no way to peace. Peace is the way." And it was still very new to me. And I was working about it. And I came out of my hotel room in the morning, and I looked over the balcony, and the lake it was very windy. Very, very windy that day and wet. And the lake was all wavy and stormy. And you couldn't see the reflection of the trees or the sun or anything in it. And I went back into the room and I kept on writing, and then I came out about noon, and the sun had come out, and the lake was like a mirror. It was like glass. It was just so calm and so peaceful that you could see the trees and the flowers and the birds in the sky and the sun. And it was so clear that if it was a picture, you wouldn't have known which was the right side up. And I saw why that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. That if you're trying to be healed, if you have a problem of any kind, and you're trying to be healed of that problem, you can't be healed while you're like the lake that was all distorted and windy and ruffled and upset. But when you're at peace, and you're calm, then you can see yourself clearly as God's reflection. And believe me, that just helped me so much, because it helped me in my practice. That when my phone would go and people were calling me for help, I would say to myself, I'm not going to pray about the symptoms. I'm not going to pray about what's going on in this person's body or their life. I'm going to pray for peace. I'm going to know that the peace of God that passeth all understanding is flooding our hearts and minds right here and now, where these floods of trouble seem to be flowing. Right here is the peace. And honestly, it worked. It really worked. And when you could get the other person to be calm, to not be excited, to not be impressed by the physical picture or what was happening in their lives or their bodies, that it made such a difference, that it made their prayerful effort so much easier. And Rudyard Kipling in his poem If, he says, if you can keep your head while all about are losing theirs and blaming it on you. So he had got the same truth, the same picture. To be calm, to be at peace, to keep your head, to be level-headed. Mary Baker Eddy, the discoverer and founder of Christian Science, had many problems to meet in her life, including the desertion of students. And life must have been really, really difficult for her because so many people didn't understand this science that had been revealed to her, and it would have been difficult for them to understand it. But she understood peace. She had to demonstrate peace in her own life, time after time. And one time she had this article printed in the Boston Globe in December 1904, and it's entitled, How Strife May Be Stilled. And this article has helped me many times when there's been bombing and problems in Northern Ireland and in different countries in the world, even in the Gulf War and recent things that have been happening around the world. This article says, follow that which is good. A Japanese may believe in a heaven for him who dies in defense of his country, but the steadying, elevating power of civilization destroys such illusions and should overcome evil with good. Nothing is gained by fighting, but much is lost. Peace is the promise and reward of rightness. Governments have no right to engraft into civilization the burlesque of uncivil economics. War is in itself an evil, barbarous, devilish. Victory in error is defeat in truth. War is not in the domain of good. War weakens power and must finally fall, pierced by its own sword. The principle of all power is God, and God is love. Whatever brings into human thought or action an element opposed to love is never requisite, never a necessity, and is not sanctioned by the law of God, the law of love. The founder of Christianity said, My peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Christian Science reinforces Christ's sayings and doings. The principle of Christian Science demonstrates peace. Christianity is the chain of scientific being, reappearing in all ages, maintaining its obvious correspondence with the Scriptures, and uniting all periods in the design of God. The first commandment in the Hebrew Decalogue, Thou shalt have no other gods before me, obeyed, is sufficient to still all strife. God is the divine mind, hence the sequence. Had all peoples one mind, peace would reign. God is Father, infinite, and this great truth, when understood in its divine metaphysics, will establish the brotherhood of man, end wars, and demonstrate on earth peace, goodwill toward men. That's the end of that little article, which has helped me so many, many times. Some years ago in Northern Ireland, when the Board of Lectureship in Boston asked all the Christian Science churches throughout the world to hold a special lecture on peace. And our church was going to have one of these lectures. So to support that lecture, I had been looking up things in the writings of Mary Baker Eddy and in the Bible on peace. And I'd written out many verses and things that I liked, and I was really trying to get a better understanding of what peace was. And we were having a pre-lecture meeting one evening, and at the time I had a bed and breakfast, and I had 5 permanent people, men, who stayed with me, and I did evening meals. And I had been asked to go to a hospital to visit a woman who'd had many heart operations. This woman was not a Christian Scientist, but she would come to our church sometimes and would read. She'd just gone through a very big operation. And her daughter, her only child, called me, and she was very disturbed, and she said, "My mother has had her operation, but it's not a success." And she said that she had been sitting with her, but her mother was unconscious. And she said, "Myrtle, would you just go and see her and just pray with her or something?" She said, "because I don't know what to do." So I said I would go along that afternoon just to see what I could do. And I had to go into a store in town to get all the groceries for dinner that evening and breakfast the next day. And I had about 5 plastic bags of shopping. And I went along to the hospital, and they hadn't even moved this woman out of the operating theatre. She was on a life support machine, and the doctor said to me, "It's only a matter of time. We think that maybe an hour or something, and she'll be gone." So the woman appeared to be unconscious, and I sat there and I didn't quite know what to do or how to pray for the woman. I wasn't too sure about what she would want and what should I be doing. And I began to think about this pre-lecture meeting that we were having in our church, and that I had been praying to understand peace better. So I began to pray to know that because God is a peaceful God, and He's always at peace, and that He's omnipresent, that He fills all space, that He filled the space in this hospital where we were, in this operating theatre. So that meant that peace filled this operating theatre. Now, there appeared to be the fear from this woman's family, great waves of fear. There appeared to be the fear of the woman herself. You could see her heart rate, how fearful she was. There was fear from the doctors, there was nurses, there was fear from me. And so I said, well, I'm going to sit here and say, "Peace, be still," to all these waves of fear. Peace, be still. That's what the Master said when He calmed the storm at sea. He said, "Peace, be still." So I sat there and thought, I'm going to be at peace. I'm going to be still. I'm going to claim it for everybody here. And I sat that way, and it must have been for about 15 minutes. And I felt really, really at peace. And a nurse came out, and she looked at the woman and she shouted, "Doctor, she's breathing normally." And the doctor said, "Switch off the life support machine. She doesn't need it." And he came over and he said to me, "You were praying, weren't you?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, your prayer was answered." And the woman, she started to come round, the colour started to come back into her face. And so I looked at the clock, and it was 5 o'clock, and I had to go home and prepare a meal for 5 men. And then I had to get ready and go out to church. And so I lifted all my plastic bags, and I came out. It was beginning to get dark. And there was a man standing at the gate, a security man. And he said to me, "I don't know where you live, love, but there's no buses. The buses are all off. There are bombs all over town. And there aren't any buses. You won't be able to get home." And I said, "Well, I need to take 2 buses." it's quite a long way away. I said, do you think that I could get a taxi? And he said, no, there aren't any taxis running. He said, the buses can't get through, the taxis can't get through. They're setting fire to buses and taxis and cars everywhere, so you can't get home. So I was beginning to get a bit disturbed, and I thought, no, I'm going to claim the same peace is here. So I said to him, there must be a taxi company around here somewhere. He said, well, you're wasting your time. He said, there's one over there. He said, on the Falls Road. Now, the Falls Road is IRA country. There aren't any lights there at night. All the roads all in darkness. And the security forces used to not go in there. And police didn't go in there. And this man said to me, if I were you, I would not go up that road. So I said, well, I do have to get home. So I went up the road, and there was a little taxi company, and I opened the door and went in. There were about 6 drivers all sitting there smoking. They knew they couldn't get out. And I said, I would like to get a taxi home, please. Now, in Northern Ireland, if you tell anybody where you live, they know if you're a Catholic or a Protestant. So the taxi man said, where are you going? And I told him the road that I lived on. And he said, are you trying to be funny? He said, you know we can't drive on that road. So I said, well, it's not that you can't, it's just that you won't. And he said, lady, whether we can't or we won't, we're not. So get out. So I picked up my bags and I went out, and I was standing. I was quite disturbed at the door, and I said, Myrtle, be at peace. You just be at peace. Don't be disturbed. The power that got you here will get you home. It's right for you to make their dinner. It's right for you to go to church. You don't get home. Well, then I heard one of these drivers saying, she's still there. And another driver said, I'll take her home. So these other drivers said, are you mad? I wouldn't take all the money in the world and go up that road. So we came out, and I was very grateful, thought it was an answer to my prayer. This man just opened the back door, pushed me in, all my grocery, all the fruit, everything fell all over the back, and he took off like a mad thing. Through every light, he just drove right through it all. So I picked myself up, picked up all the groceries, was holding on to the back of the seat, and I tried to have a normal conversation with this man, but he didn't want to talk, and he was a very angry man and was driving in an angry way. So I began to think, well, I'm not going to be disturbed by that either. I'm just going to be at peace. And I'm going to claim the peace of God that passeth all understanding is flooding our hearts and minds. And that includes his. That includes that man's mind. And it includes the minds of all the people in our province who are stuck and who can't get home from work. And they're all agitated. This peace of God is everywhere. It's everybody's. So I noticed that the man began to slow down, and he began to drive more normally. And I would say to him, like, I used to live in that road, and I used to go to that school, and I'm trying to make conversation. And finally we were going over a bridge, and this driver said to me, I suppose that you are a Paisleyite. Now, a Paisleyite is someone who follows the Reverend Ian Paisley, who you might have seen on your television. He's a minister, a church minister, but he's also a politician. And he's very outspoken. And so I said to this man, no, I'm not a follower of this man. So he said, well, what are you? And I replied, well, I'm a free thinker. And he said, what is that supposed to mean? And I said, well, it means that I believe that we're all children of the one God, and that God doesn't know anything about Protestants or Catholics, and he doesn't really care. And I said, I believe that he loves us all equally, and that he has a solution to this problem in our country that will please us all if we would all just stop and listen. Well, he sort of turned round and looked at me, and I remember thinking that I'd never seen such a war-weary look on a face before. And he said, "Mrs., I used to believe that. But too many terrible things have happened in this country, and I don't believe it anymore." And I put over my hand and I touched his arm. And I said, "Please, keep on believing that." I said, "Do you know the only thing we've all got left is hope? So you have to keep on hoping, and I have to keep on hoping, and I have to keep on praying." Now, by this time, he had reached the road that I live on, and he kept saying, "Well, look at the new stores and look at the new houses." He said, "Do you know, lady, I haven't driven on this road for 15 years. He said, "For 15 years, I've been frightened to drive on a part of my own town." Well, soon we had reached my home, and I went to get out, and he said, "You just sit there, sweetheart, and I'll get all the groceries. I'll pick everything up." So we picked everything up, and he carried them up the steps, and I got out my purse. I was getting out the key, and I turned the key in the door, and then I said to him, "How much do I owe you?" And he put his arms round me, and he hugged me, and he said, "It's on the house, sweetheart." He said, "Do you know that you helped me to do something today that I thought I could never do? And if you ever want a taxi, you come to us." He said, "I'll tell the boys about you." And he went backwards down my path, blowing me kisses all the way. And honestly, I felt like I was 10 feet off the ground. And I came into my house and I thought, I can't wait to go to this meeting in church, because I proved that there's power in peace, in being at peace. I proved it to a degree. Well, just at that, all my 5 lodgers came in looking for their dinner. I hadn't even started. And one said, "Aren't you going to church tonight?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, because there aren't any buses or taxis." So he said, "I'll take you. I know all the back streets. And I'll take you to church, and I'll wait for you." And he said to the other 4 boys, "You make the dinner. And when I bring Myrtle home, we'll all have dinner together." And I went to church. I shared this experience and came home, and the boys had all cooked a lovely dinner. And right in the middle of that war and the burning and the bombings and the everything was this peace demonstrated. And I felt, I have learned the lesson of my life. And I'm sorry to tell you, I have to keep on learning it every day. You think if you learn it once, you've got the message. But you don't. You really have to keep on and persist with it. And sit down and tell yourself, I'm going to claim this peace for me and for everybody else, because it's your divine right. It's your absolute divine right. I remember my first Christmas as a Christian Scientist, after my mother had had that wonderful healing. And we didn't have a lot of money. At the time, my mother was a widow, and there just wasn't much money around. And I remember at Christmas time, we didn't quite know what we were going to do about our Christmas dinner. And a Christian Science practitioner came to visit me. And she had brought a little box of chocolates. And I said to her that we didn't have a Christmas dinner. And she reminded me of the story in the Bible about Elijah and the woman, and she was going to die with her 2 sons because they were in debt and they owed all this money. And then Elijah asked her what she had in the house. And so this woman said to me, what do you have in your house? I'm sure you have something. Well, just after she left, a neighbour came to the house, and she had 3 little girls, and she asked me if I would make new dresses and bonnets for the 3 dolls for Christmas. And I thought, well, this is wonderful. I can do this, and that will give us enough money to get something for her dinner. And I had lots of pieces of nice material and dressed them all up in little capes and so forth. Well, I needed some trimming to put round their little hats. And my mother asked me if she could do anything to help me. So I said, well, maybe you could go into town and get me the trimming. And she said, okay. Now, all the money that we had in the house was equal to $50. That was all the money we had. So I said to my mother, well, there's the money for your bus fare and for this trimming, which was very cheap trimming. And I told her the store to go to, and she was very late in coming back. And she came back. She said she had to walk back from town. They didn't have that trimming, so she bought this other trimming, which was very expensive. And she used up all the money that we had. And she didn't even have enough money to come back on the bus. And so I was so angry because she had paid so much for the trimming that I would make very little profit on dressing the dolls. And I looked in a coat pocket, and I had enough money in that pocket to take me in the bus into town. And I decided to go on the bus, and I got on the bus, and it was Christmas Eve, and it was late in the evening. The shops were all starting to close, and there were people on the bus. There was someone there with a little bicycle for his child, and I had to go upstairs as there weren't any seat, and men were smoking cigars, and everybody was shouting Happy Christmas. And I remember tears rolling down my cheeks and feeling so sorry for myself. And when the bus stopped at our city hall, there was a big Christmas tree, and there were carol singers, and up in lights it said on the front of the city hall, "Peace on earth, goodwill towards men." And I stood there and thought, are my thoughts filled with peace on earth or goodwill towards men? I don't feel a lot of goodwill towards my mother at this moment. And I thought, there's no peace in my thoughts. And I began to see that that wasn't right. And I began to think, well, I forgive her. She was doing the best she knew how to. And also she didn't like to come into town on a busy day like Christmas Eve. And it was kind of her to even want to do that for me. So I went along to the store, and I told the girl the problem, what had happened, that my mother got the wrong stuff. So she said, well, I'm very sorry, but once we cut it to your length, we can't give you back your money. So she said, just a minute, there's the manager, she said. They were getting ready to close the store. She said, I'll go over and have a word with him. And this practitioner had been saying to me that you have to change your thinking, and then your world will change. And I would say to her, I don't understand that. If my world would change, I could change my thinking. And she would say, no, it's the other way round, but I really couldn't understand it. So while this girl went to speak to the manager of the shop, I said to myself, I did it. I changed my thinking. I changed my thinking from self-pity and not having anything and anger at my mother to love for my mother and compassion and charity. I changed my thinking. And I couldn't, that's what the practitioner meant. It was like the penny dropped, and I was feeling really excited. And this woman came over and she said, well, I don't know what's the matter with him. She said, it must be because it's Christmas, or he's the original Scrooge, but he says you can have your money back. So she gave me back the money, and then she said, what sort of braid was it you needed? And I told her. She said, well, we've lots of little pieces of that we can't sell to people. And I said, well, it's only for dolls' clothes. And she said, well, I'll give you a bag of it for nothing. So she gave me my money back. She gave me the doll's clothes, and it was a beautiful, crisp evening. And I decided I'm going to walk home. And I walked home, and the difference in my attitude from when I was sitting in the bus crying, and I'm walking home like I felt I'm the richest woman in Ireland because God and I share a secret. God has explained to me what it means to change your thinking before your circumstances change. So I said, Happy Christmas to every person I met. And when I got home, my mother said, while you were out, somebody delivered a hamper of food. There was no card. To this day, I don't know who delivered. There was everything in this hamper. And the woman came for the dolls. She was so pleased she paid me twice the amount. And I said, I'll run up to the butcher's and I'll get a big chicken. And I ran up to the butcher's and he was pulling down his shutters and I said, do you have a big chicken? He said, I do. A woman was to collect it and she didn't. And he said, you can have it for half price because it's Christmas. And he said, I'm going to give you some other things. And he gave me sausages and pork fillet and lots of things because he had no more room in his freezer. And I came home and had the most wonderful Christmas, not because of the things, not because of all the food and the nice things, but because I had learned how to change my thinking. And if you're listening to this tape and you have many, many problems, just change your thinking. Change your thinking from disturbance and anger and self-pity and grief to love and peace. Fill your thoughts with the peace of God that passeth all understanding. Say to yourself, I'm going to be at peace. I'm not going to be disturbed by anything or anybody, not by any person or any group of people, and not by anything that's happening in my life or my bank account or my body. I'm going to be at peace. And that peace will become the way to healing and regeneration. And I know that that's true because I've proved it in my life over and over and over again. So all this truth is yours for proving.